I will now be going over the basic game rules for Burning Banners Rage of the Witch Queen. There is a basic game and an advanced game, and in the rulebook there are advanced rules intermingled with the basic rules. Those will not be in this video. I will be redoing another rules video that will have the combined basic and advanced rules. But for this one, I'm just going to teach you the basic rules for Burning Banners. For some of my videos, I do have chapter banners and stuff in the video. I'm actually just going to forego that. The chapters and different rules that you may be looking for will be in the description of the video on timestamps. The basic game and advanced game. Burning Banners contains 2 books, the rulebook and a separate campaign book. The rulebook is designed to help players learn to play by organizing the rules into 2 sections, a basic game, which introduces players to the fundamental rules of the game and allows for quick play, followed later on by an advanced game, which adds rules for monsters, heroes, magic spells. Reference to the advanced game when reading through the basic game will be in red ink. Those will not be in this video. Again, I will be doing another video with the advanced basic combination when I learn the advanced game. There are 6 kingdoms in Burning Banners. The Fjordland, the Eastern Empire, the Oathborn, the Army of the Night, and then the 2 Shaska kingdoms, Goblins, and Orcs. Campaigns in Burning Banners are always divided into 2 sides, Invader and Resistance. 1 or more kingdoms will form the Resistance, and 1 or more will form the Invaders. If more than 2 players are playing, each side will play as a team. Armies are friendly with other armies from their own kingdom, armies are allied with armies on the same side as them, and armies are enemies of the armies of the opposing side. Burning Banners contains 4 mounted maps which can be fitted together to create one large map covering most of the continent of Karos. The 2 northern maps are the Broken Coast, the Wildlands, and the 2 southern maps are the Imperial Heartlands and the Fields of Ash. The maps are divided into hexagonal spaces called hexes, which govern movement and combat. The artwork in a hex determines its terrain type. A terrain effects chart, which is going to be right here, illustrates the different terrain and types and governs how movement and combat is affected by them. The season display is a play aid containing several different tracks. The season track, the turn track, and the income track, and the revolt track. A year in Burning Banners is composed of 3 campaign seasons, spring, summer, and autumn, followed by a winter season. During campaign seasons, players conduct 1 turn for each kingdom in play. Winter seasons are skipped in the basic game. Burning Banners contains a number of poker-sized playing cards. These are not used when playing the basic game, with one exception. Each kingdom has an information card which is placed near the kingdom's playmat. The rest of the cards in the card display are set aside. Now let's take a look at the markers used for the game. The first of these markers is gold. Gold is represented in-game by circular playing pieces with values of 1, 5, and 10 gold. These are interchangeable, i.e. 5 1 gold pieces can be exchanged at any time for 1 5 gold piece. Then there are banners. Each kingdom has a banner marker featuring its symbol. When setting up a campaign, banners are placed on the turn track section of the season display, establishing the turn order for which season. The reverse of each banner is used when the kingdom collapses. And here's just a random example of how they would look on the season display on the turn track. Each kingdom has an income level, which is recorded using the income markers on the income track on the season display. And they do have plus 20 side. Raised markers. These markers are placed in settlements that have been pillaged and abandoned by their inhabitants or otherwise thrown into disarray, and we will get into settlements later. Then we have control markers. Each kingdom has a number of these, used when it takes control of a settlement. Units in the basic game are armies. Armies are rated as follows. First off is their build cost. This is the cost in gold to build an army. Move it from playmat to map. And here is an example of the playmat. So you'd be taking it off of the playmat and moving it to the map. Self-explanatory, I guess. Then over here on the right-hand side, we have their combat rating, the number and type of dice and army rolls when resolving combat. Each symbol equals 1 dice. A white symbol indicates a light dice, that's going to be 1d6, which in this case he has 2, and the black symbol indicates a heavy dice, which is going to be the d8. Then we have down here in the bottom right-hand corner is going to be their movement rating. This is the distance in hexes an army may move when activated. This can be affected by terrain moved through. And then over on the left-hand side, you have their kingdom affiliation, which this one would be affiliated with the goblins. Armies have a weakened state. They are flipped over when damaged, becoming weakened, indicated by a red border on the piece's right-hand side. Weakened armies have a recovery cost instead of a build cost. This is the gold required to flip a weakened army back to its full strength side, a process called recovery, which we will go over later. So the recovery cost would be 2. Here we have an example of a fragile army. They are eliminated when flipped over instead of weakened. They're identified by a gray border on the piece's right-hand side. And on the back, they're just a ghostly figure. Then there are feral armies. Feral armies consist of wild creatures. They're identified by a distinctly shaped build and recovery symbol. There are fragile as well. There are huge armies as well. They consist of giant creatures. They're identified by a black hex symbol around their movement. Then there are also going to be siege engines. Each kingdom may build a siege engine army to assist in attacks against fortified settlements. Elimination. When a unit is eliminated, it's returned to its kingdom playmat and is available to be rebuilt. Dice rolls. Burning Banners uses 2 types of dice. White 6-sided dice, referred to as light dice, or d6s, and black 8-sided dice, referred to as heavy dice, or d8s. The notation 1d6, or 1 white square, or rectangle, means 1 light dice. The notation 1d8, or 1 black diamond, or black square, means 1 heavy dice. When rolling either type of dice, the goal is to roll as many results as possible equal to or greater than 5. This is expressed in the rules itself as 5+, meaning 5 or greater. Each roll of a 5+ is a success. Any other result is a failure. Dice rolls may be modified in the rules by notation +x or -x. A roll which is modified by +1 would score a success on a roll of 4+. Dice roll 4 + 1 modifier equals 5, a success. Burning Banners campaigns may be played by up to 6 players divided into 2 sides, Invader and Resistance. Each side plays as a team, supporting one another amid attempting to defeat the other side. Some rules for how teams function are as follows. First is transferring gold. A kingdom may transfer gold during its turn to an allied kingdom at a ratio of 2 to 1. The transferring kingdom spends 2 gold. The allied kingdom would then receive 1 gold. Kingdoms may not transfer control or trade settlements. Allied settlements are welcoming to units of allied kingdoms and may not be attacked by them. A kingdom may not place control markers in a settlement loyal to or controlled by allied kingdoms. And also, before a unit enters an Allied-controlled settlement, the Allied player may deny entry to the unit, in which case the unit may not enter the settlement. Settlements which deny entry remain Allied and may not be attacked. And when it comes to victory, Burning Banners is a game of alliances. Unless there is a special campaign rule stating otherwise, players win or lose as a team rather than individually. The very first step of setting up a game is choosing your campaign. Before play, players will consult the campaign book and decide which campaign they wish to play. Now, there are dozens of campaigns in Burning Banners. The smallest feature 1 map and 2 players, while the largest uses all 4 maps and up to 6 players. When playing a campaign with fewer players than there are kingdoms, some players will control more than 1 kingdom. The campaign book will include all of the information needed to play a game, which maps and kingdoms are in play, the order which players set up, the strength of their forces involved, and the campaign's victory conditions. After a campaign is selected, you'll prepare the season display. You'll place the season display near the map, and then you'll take the season marker and campaign end marker and put them on the spaces in the season track indicated in the campaign rules. For example, in the introductory campaign, the duration will be 3 turns. The start date is going to be Year 1, Spring, and the end date will be 3 turns later at Year 1, Autumn. Then you will take the income markers and place them on the income track according to the rules of the campaign as well. Referring back to the introductory campaign, The Invasion of Drefeld, we have the Oathborn and the Fjordland going against each other. The Oathborn's starting income is set to 2, and the Fjordlands are set to 4. Then you will place a banner for each kingdom in its space on the turn track, in order indicated by the campaign rules. For example, in the introductory campaign, it has the Fjordlands as the invaders and the Oathbound as the resistance. The Oathbound would be going first, followed by the Fjordlands. So, you put it up here and here. Then you will prepare the playmats. Each kingdom begins with a playmat and an information card which summarizes that kingdom's special rules. Here are the information cards for the Fjordlands and the Oathbound. All of a kingdom's pieces are placed on the playmat. Gold, units, control markers. When playing the basic game, you would ignore the spaces on the advanced section of the playmat. Collect gold indicated in the opening build section of the campaign rules. So for example, we have the Oathbound at their starting income of 2, the opening build is 6 gold, and a control marker for Shaded Vale, and then starting income 4, opening build's 15, control markers Norstead and Far Tombed. Then you'll place your armies and siege engines in their spaces on your playmat, and as well as your gold and control markers in the markers space. And when you're ready, the basic game setup will look something like this. And again, you can refer to your campaign to see which of the 4 maps you'll be using of 1 or more. You'll have your main map, your playmat, your information card. You'll have your raised markers handy. Your gold will also be readily available. You'll have your season display. And then, as you're setting up the map that you're using in your campaign, amongst the raised and control for advanced games will be the abandoned layer markers on the map as instructed during the campaign rules. You'll place the markers near the map. Then you do your opening builds. In the order specified in the campaign rules, each kingdom builds armies, placing them on the map as instructed. The opening builds section entry in each of the campaigns that you're playing instructions will list the starting amount of gold in which you have to build your armies. It may also list other units which are built at the start of the game at no cost. These units must be placed on the map during setup, but gold may be spent and or saved unless the campaign instructions dictate otherwise. And now you're ready to begin play. Kingdoms conduct turns in sequence starting with the leftmost banner on the turn track. How turns are conducted is outlined in the sequence of play 5.0 in the rulebook. Once each kingdom has completed its turn, the season ends. In Burning Banners, units may have 5 different characteristics. Ranged, represented by these 2 little arrows. Stealth, represented by this little lightning bolt. Regenerate, this little blood drop. Flying, the little bat. And Mage in the advanced game, this starburst. Ranged. During combat, an army that is ranged, those 2 little arrows, wins ties, inflicting 1 hit on the opponent. If both sides in combat have ranged, neither player wins ties. Ranged has no effect when resolving an ambush. A unit with flying may not move through a hex that contains an enemy army with ranged. And Stealth. If
If an army has stealth, it may declare an ambush during combat. That's going to be section 9.6 if you have the rulebook, and it'll be under the combat timestamp on this video. When an ambush is declared, instead of rolling dice simultaneously, the side with stealth strikes the opposing stack, rolling dice equal to its combat rating. Then, if the target survives, it strikes back using its combat rating. If both sides are in combat have stealth, neither side may declare an ambush. Regenerate. An army with Regenerate recovers, that's section 10.4 in the rulebook, and that'll be the timestamp of building and recovery on this video, as a free action, and does not require a nearby settlement. Units may not use Regenerate while being besieged. Again, that'll be building and recovery 10.3 in the rulebook. Flying. A unit with flying gains the following attributes. 1. It may enter any terrain type on the map during movement except layer hexes, ignoring the terrain costs. 2. When moving, it may pass through a hex containing an enemy army or hostile settlement unless the enemy army in the hex has flying or ranged. 3. When attacking across a river or major river hex side, its opponent does not gain a terrain modifier. And 4. It may attack across sea hex sides. Flying has no effect when a unit is using ship movement. And again, that's going to be section 8 on this video, movement, or specifically 8.1.4 in the rulebook. Now moving over to characteristics. In Burning Banners, armies may have 3 different characteristics: feral, fragile, and or huge. This little animal eyes in their cost up here is going to represent feral. Feral armies consist of wild creatures, rats, wolves, bats, even clouds of insects. A feral army may enter a welcoming settlement like any other army. A feral army may not use ship movement, 8.1.4 in the rulebook, timestamp movement in this video. Fragile. Fragile armies represent forces with low cohesiveness, irregulars, conscripts, and marauding warbands. While most armies are weakened when they receive a hit, fragile armies are instead eliminated and cannot recover. And then this black hex down here represents huge. Huge armies are gigantic creatures that tower over the landscape. If a huge army occupies a settlement, that settlement is raised regardless of its posture. That's going to be under section 4, settlements in this video, specifically 4.6 in the rulebook. A settlement may not remove a raised marker while a huge army occupies the hex. A huge army may not use ship movement, 8.1.4 of the rulebook, or the section movement in this video. Next up is going to be a lot about settlements. Settlements are identified on the map by the settlement's name, plus any or all of the following symbols: loyalty, city, wilderness, fortified, and port. First up is loyalty. Settlement marked with the kingdom's crest is loyal to that kingdom. In this example, Aureliana is loyal to the Eastern Empire. A loyal settlement which does not contain a control marker or raised marker is welcoming to friendly and allied units, and hostile to enemy units. And settlements which are loyal to kingdoms that are not in play are loyal neutrals. The campaign rules establish the posture, which is going to be explained later, of loyal neutral settlements. Then you'll have neutral. A settlement with no loyalty symbol is neutral. Fort Gorod is a neutral settlement. The campaign rules establish the posture of neutral settlements. This red star denotes a city. Cities have special rules that affect looting. You can find that under Settlements 4.8, Garrisons 9.5, Combat, and Kingdom Collapse 7.6, the activation phase. Then there can be Wilderness Settlement. A wilderness settlement combines the characteristics of a settlement with its terrain type of the settlement occupies. It is both a settlement hex and a forest or mountain hex. A wilderness settlement benefits from both its garrison, the hex's terrain type when attacked. There is no additional movement cost to enter a wilderness settlement. Wilderness raised markers are a little different. If a wilderness settlement is raised, which we will go over shortly, the movement cost to enter the hex reverts to that of the hex's terrain type. Use a wilderness raised marker to indicate its terrain type. Settlements without a wilderness symbol use the normal raised marker. For example, we'll say this Fjordland ranger is going to move into this raised wilderness settlement. Normally, if an army enters a wilderness settlement, it would spend 1 movement point. But since this one is raised, the army pays 2 movement points because it is a wilderness settlement and a wilderness hex. A Fjordland Ranger army, which gains 1 extra light dice when occupying a forest hex, would gain that benefit while the attacking or occupying a forest wilderness settlement, raised or not. And that ability comes from the information card of the Fjordlands. There are 2 types of fortified settlements. Fortified, which is this castle tower with the circle, and then magically fortified, which is this circle with the spikes on it. The term fortified applies to both types unless a rule specifies otherwise. And remembering that 5 is the base for success, when attacking a fortified settlement, the attacker suffers a -1 modifier to its die rolls, meaning that 6+ would be required to score a success. Magically fortified settlements impose a -2 modifier on the attacker, meaning that a 7+ is required to score a success. Note that it's impossible for a light dice to roll successes against a magically fortified settlement without the aid of a siege engine, which we'll go under in the section Combat. Critical hit rolls, again in combat, are not affected by fortifications. Fortified settlements may not be targeted by strikes. An attacking unit with a stealth may not declare an ambush against a fortified settlement. If a unit defending a fortified settlement has stealth, it is free to declare an ambush, in which case the attacker, if it survives, may strike back. The fortifications modifier, being a terrain feature, would be ignored. Each siege engine army adjacent to a fortification negates 1 -1 modifier on the attacker's dice rolls. 2 siege engines adjacent to a magically fortified settlement would negate that fortification's entire -2 modifier. Siege engines must be friendly or allied in order to assist an attacking army. This anchor represents a port. A unit performing a ship movement action in a port settlement gains a ship movement rating of 6. That's under section Movement. Ports are only besieged if adjacent to 2 enemy armies. And that's Building and Recovery, Section 10. Posture. A settlement's posture determines how it interacts with the different kingdoms in play. A loyal settlement is welcoming to friendly and allied armies and hostile to enemy armies. The posture of neutral and loyal neutral settlements is outlined in the campaign rules. The posture of a settlement changes when it contains a control or raised marker. So, using this first introductory The Invasion of Drefeld as an example, you can go up and see that the posture, Fort Garrod, is going to be hostile to both players. A welcoming settlement has the characteristics that units may freely enter and occupy welcoming settlements. When an army ends its activation in a welcoming neutral settlement, it may place its control marker in the settlement to increase its income by 1. Armies may not loot welcoming settlements unless removing an enemy control marker. An army may remove a raised marker from a welcoming settlement. Hostile settlements. An army must defeat a hostile settlement in order to enter it, at which point it will loot the settlement and possibly gain control of it. An army may not remove a raised marker from a hostile settlement. And remember, a flying unit may pass through but not end its movement in a hostile settlement hex, provided the hex is not occupied by a unit with flying or ranged. Attacking an unoccupied settlement, that is a settlement which does not contain an army may attack an unoccupied hostile settlement using its combat rating. The unoccupied settlement defends with its garrison. If the attack stack wins the combat, it must advance into the hex and loot it. Garrison is going to be explained in the combat section of this video. When an army enters a hostile settlement, it loots. Looting is a free action and immediately generates gold for the looting army's kingdom. An army may not loot a welcoming settlement. In the advanced game, a feral army, which is going to be represented by the little wolf eyes symbol, may not loot unless it is stacked with a hero. Gold from looting. A kingdom gains 2 gold when looting. When a Shaska army loots, it gains 3 gold instead. When an army loots a city, it gains double the normal gold. A Shaska army looting a city gains 6 gold, for example. Now let's talk about control. Control affects where a kingdom can build its armies and how much gold it generates during the income phase. Control markers. Each kingdom has a limited number of control markers which may be placed when its army occupies settlements it does not control. Placing a control marker on a settlement allows the controlling kingdom to build its units there and increase that kingdom's income. A kingdom cannot place control markers if it has none remaining on its playmat. Placing control markers. When an enemy ends its activation in a settlement it does not control, the settlement's posture determines what happens. If the settlement is hostile, it is looted, and if it contains an enemy control marker, the marker is removed. Then, if the settlement is loyal to the occupying kingdom or one of its allies, the kingdom's income increases by 1. Otherwise, a friendly control marker is placed in the hex, the occupying kingdom increases its income by 1. A raised marker is placed instead of a control marker if the occupying player wishes, or if the occupying army is huge or feral. Finally, if the settlement was an enemy controlled, the kingdom's income is reduced by 1. Income is not increased if the settlement is raised. If the settlement is welcoming, no looting occurs. If the settlement contains a raised marker, it may be removed as a free action or left in place. A control marker of the occupying kingdom may be placed in the settlement, in which case the occupying player increases its income by 1. If the settlement is loyal to or controlled by the occupying kingdom or one of its allies, control does not change and income is unaffected. A settlement may never contain both a control marker and a raised marker. Now, control has some effects. A neutral settlement with no marker is controlled by no kingdom. We'll use Chanos as the example here. This is the neutral settlement with no marker. It is controlled by no kingdom. It is hostile or welcoming to the kingdoms in play based on its posture, as outlined in the rules for the campaign being played. A loyal settlement with no marker is controlled by the kingdom identified on the settlement's loyalty symbol. It generates 1 income for the controlling kingdom each season. It is hostile to the kingdom's enemies and welcoming to the armies of those of its allies. It permits building and recovery. A settlement with a control marker is controlled by the kingdom that placed the marker. It generates 1 income for the controlling kingdom each season, is hostile to the kingdom's enemies, welcoming to its own armies and those of its allies, and permits building and recovery. A settlement with a raised marker is controlled by no player and treated as if it were not a settlement hex, reverting to the terrain type of the hex that it occupies. Removing control markers can happen in 2 ways. It may be removed involuntarily when an enemy army defeats the settlement and advances into it, or voluntarily. During its turn, a kingdom may remove any number of its control markers, replacing them with raised markers. This occurs even if the settlement is welcoming. A kingdom may not loot when replacing one of its control markers with a raised marker. There is an exception to that, which is called laying waste, which we will go over later. Remember that control markers will affect income. Control of settlements determines the amount of gold a kingdom will receive during its income phase. A kingdom's income is increased by 1 when one of its control markers is placed on the map, or an enemy control marker raised marker is removed from one of its loyal settlements. A kingdom's income is decreased by 1 every time one of its control markers is removed from the map, or one of its loyal settlements is raised or has a control marker placed in it. And here's a look at the income adjustment table as a reference. +1 when your control marker is placed, +1 when a raised marker or control marker is removed from your loyal settlement, -1 when your control marker is removed from the map, -1 when your loyal settlement is raised or has a control marker placed in it. Speaking of raised markers, let's take a look at those. Poor Shaded Vale here has been raised. A raised marker can be placed in a settlement for a variety of reasons. When it's laid waste by a Shaska kingdom, when it is entered by a huge unit, when an occupying army chooses to place a raised rather than control marker, when a player chooses to remove its control marker from the map, and at the start of a game as outlined in the campaign rules. Raised effects are as following. It may not be looted, controlled, or used to build and recover units. It has no posture, has none of the symbols associated with the settlement, fortification, city, port, or loyalty. It reverts to the terrain type of the hex that the settlement occupies. Removing a raised marker. During its turn, a kingdom may remove a raised marker from any settlement occupied by one of its armies, provided the settlement will be welcoming to that kingdom once the raised marker is removed and before a control marker is placed. Removing a raised marker is a free action costing 2 gold. Once the raised marker is removed and the hex resumes its status as a settlement, place a control marker if appropriate. Shaska armies are a little different. They use entry hexes. Units may be built in friendly entry hexes. Permanent entry hexes include those with the goblin symbol along the northern map edges and the orc symbol on the eastern map edges. A campaign's special rules may specify other hexes as temporary entry hexes. These are not marked and operate as entry hexes for that campaign only. Now, the effect of an entry hex. A unit beginning a ship move in an entry hex gains ship movement points. So that would be the water ones here. A kingdom may build new armies in its entry hexes. A unit built in a sea entry hex may not end the turn in the hex. Unit hexes are never besieged. A unit may pass through another kingdom's entry hex while moving, but may not end its movement in the hex. Years, seasons, and turns. A campaign in Burning Banners will generally span 1 or more years, each of which is broken down into 4 seasons. The 3 campaign seasons of spring, summer, and autumn, plus winter. During a campaign season, every kingdom resolves 1 turn. It collects gold, spends its buildings, or recovering its forces and attacks enemy armies and settlements. During winter, all fighting comes to a halt. In the basic game, winter seasons are skipped. Years, seasons, and turns are tracked on the season display. Years. When a campaign begins, the season marker is placed on one of the spaces on the Year 1 row of the season track, and campaign ends marker on another space, anywhere from Year 1 to Year 3. This determines the duration of the campaign. For example, this one here is a duration 6 turns, start date Year 1 summer, and date Year 3 spring. But in the introductory campaign, it's going to be 1 year. A campaign begins with the season indicated in the campaign rules. After every kingdom has resolved its turn, the season marker is moved 1 space to the right on the season track. When it enters the space containing the campaign end marker, the game ends after all kingdoms have completed their turn. When a season marker enters a winter space, no turns are resolved. Move the season marker to the spring space of the following year. If the current year is Year 3 and the campaign duration is more than 3 years, flip the season marker over and rotate it so that the correct span of years is at the top. Then place it in the spring space of Year 1. By cycling the season marker this way, campaigns of any duration may be played. For example, Year 1 to 3, Years 4 to 6, Years 7 to 9, Years 10 to 12. Turns. Kingdoms resolve their turns one at a time in the order indicated on the turn track, starting with the banner in the first turn space and proceeding from left to right down the line. Once all kingdoms have completed their turn, the season ends. Each turn is resolved using the sequence outlined below in the rulebook, which I will go over right now. First being the income phase. During the income phase, the income actions are going to be the kingdom may disband its siege engines. Additionally, if one of the following kingdoms is active, the Army of the Night, it may attempt to place a coven on the map. The Eastern Empire must roll on the revolt table, and a Shaska kingdom may lay waste to any number of settlements it controls. Then, in the income step, the active kingdom gains gold equal to its income level. Additionally, if one of the following kingdoms is active, the Eastern Empire, it must spend gold equal to the amount indicated on the revolt track. And if a Shaska kingdom is active, it must pay 1 gold for each control marker it has on the map or suffer collapse. Then, after the income is the activation phase. During that, friendly figures and armies on the map may become ready. Units may be built and activate. If, at the end of this phase, all of the active kingdom cities are razed or enemy controlled, the kingdom collapses. If a Shashka kingdom, it collapses if it has no control markers on the map. The active kingdom's banner is moved to the turn complete box on the turn track. If all kingdoms have completed their turn, the season ends. If a season marker occupies the space containing the campaign end marker, the game is over. Calculate victory based on the campaign's instructions. Otherwise, advance the season marker to the next space on the season track. If it is a winter space, move the marker to the spring space of the following year.
Move all banners out of the turn complete spaces to the turn track and back to their starting point and begin the next season. Taking a bit of a more in-depth look at the income phase, during each income phase, the active kingdom gains gold, in which it may spend during the activation phase to bring new units into play. Then there's the income actions step. During the income actions step, the active kingdom may disband its siege engines. Certain kingdoms have additional income actions they may or must resolve. The army of the night may attempt to place one of its covens on the map. The Eastern Empire must make a roll on the revolt table, which we will show in further detail in the kingdoms section of this video. And a Shashka kingdom may lay waste to settlements it controls in order to loot them and avoid paying gold to support them during the income step. Also going to be described in the kingdoms section of this video. During the actual income step, the active kingdom gains gold indicated by its position of the income marker on the income track. Shashka collapse. During its income step, an active Shashka kingdom must pay 1 gold for each settlement it controls. If it cannot do so, it collapses. Collapse is explained in the activation phase section of this video. And explained in full detail in the kingdom section, the Empire Revolt marker. During its income step, the player controlling the Eastern Empire must pay gold equal to the number of revolts on the revolt track. And that is also on the season display. Now we will take a look at the activation phase. During the activation phase, the kingdoms whose turn it is may build new armies. Activate those on the map. Armies move and fight one at a time. When a unit is selected to begin moving, it becomes active. After it has completed its move and has performed an action, it becomes finished. End its activation, and another unit may be activated. When a kingdom's turn begins, its units are ready. After each unit completes its activation, moves and/or performs an action, it may not activate again that turn. It becomes finished. As a memory aid, units should be rotated about 45 degrees as they finish their activation. Actions. When activated, a unit may move, then perform one action. After performing an action, that unit ends its activation and becomes finished. The following is a list of actions available to an active unit. Attack. An army may attack an adjacent hostile settlement or army. They may perform ship movement, use ship movement to cross sea, major river, and coastal hex sides, or enter major river hexes. Recover. Pay a weakened army's recovery cost and flip it back to its full strength side. It must be in an entry hex or in or adjacent to an unbesieged, welcoming settlement. Unique action to the Oathborn is going to be working a mine. I believe I've been calling them Oathbound this whole time. Oathborn. And you may also pass with a unit and forego an action this turn. Unlike actions, free actions may be performed by players at any time, including when finished and during an opponent's turn. Free actions may be performed multiple times if applicable. Free actions. The following is a list of free actions available to any unit, active or inactive. Place a control marker. When an army ends its activation in a settlement which is neither friendly nor allied, increase this kingdom's income. Place a raised marker. When an army ends its activation in a hostile settlement in which it cannot or chooses not to place a control marker. Perform ship movement. Active Fjordlands units only. Use ship movement as a free action to cross sea and coastal hex sides or enter major river hexes. A unit may only perform ship movement as a free action or a regular action once per turn. You may remove a raised marker from a welcoming settlement occupied by a friendly army. You may loot when an army enters a hostile settlement. You may regenerate. Recover an army with regenerate. Then a unit ends its activation, becoming finished after it performs an action, another unit activates, or a unit is built. At any point during a player's turn, he or she may declare the activation step finished. Otherwise, a kingdom's activation step ends when it cannot build or activate any of its units.
Now we'll take a look at Kingdom Collapse. At the end of an activation step, if all the active kingdom cities contain a raised marker or an enemy control marker, it collapses. And when a kingdom collapses, it is removed from play for the rest of the game. The kingdom's turn marker is flipped to its collapsed side. It will no longer conduct turns. All of its armies and control markers are removed from the map. The settlements are not raised. If its loyal settlements become loyal neutrals, hostile to the kingdom's former enemies, but welcoming to its former allies. Settlements marked with raise markers retain them. Because players often control more than one kingdom, the player controlling the collapsed kingdom may be able to continue playing with another kingdom he or she controls. Alternatively, a player may take control of a kingdom controlled by another player with more than one kingdom. Shashka Kingdom Collapse. The Shashka kingdoms must check for collapse twice during each season. During the income step, if a Shashka kingdom is unable to spend 1 gold for each of its control markers on the map, it collapses. Additionally, at the end of its activation step, if a Shashka kingdom has no control markers on the map, it collapses. A Shashka kingdom cannot collapse if it has never controlled any settlements. Once it controls the first settlement, it becomes subject to collapse. And the Eastern Empire Collapse. The Empire collapses if it suffers a revolt while the revolt marker is on its 10+ side and occupies the 9 space on the revolt track. Now we are going to go over movement. When a unit is activated, it completes all the movement before performing an action. To move, a unit moves across the map, hex to hex, crossing hex sides as it does so. Each hex entered costs movement points, MPs, which are deducted from its printed movement rating. A unit may not spend more movement points in an activation than its movement rating allows. And just a reminder, the movement rating is this number down in the lower right. As a unit moves, it spends movement points up to, but not exceeding, its movement rating. The terrain effects chart indicates the movement point cost to enter a hex or cross a hex side. And there are reference sheets provided, so there is an easy way for players to reference the terrain effects. And when activated, a unit may always move a minimum of 1 hex, even if total cost of the move would exceed its movement rating. Certain hex and hex side types are prohibited and may neither be entered nor crossed. Road movement. Units pay 1 movement point to cross hex sides containing a road or bridge symbol, regardless of other terrain. A non-flying unit that travels entirely across road and or bridge hex sides gains +1 movement point for that turn. So for a full example, 1, 2, 3, 4, and +1 because the entire movement was on a road. There are 3 types of river terrain: river hex sides, major river hex sides, and major river hexes. Armies pay +1 movement point when crossing a river hex side, and they will gain +1 light dice when defending against an attack from across a river hex side. If a river symbol terminates inside the hex without following any of the hex sides, it is a river source hex and has no effect on play. Major river hex sides, armies pay +2 movement points when crossing a major river hex side, and they gain +2 light dice when defending from against an attack across a major river hex side. And it's dice. The other one would be die, not +1 dice. In addition to serving as a hex side boundary, major rivers are a hex type, as shown above here. Major river hexes allow armies using ship movement to travel inland, moving from one major river hex to another. A unit using ship movement may cross a river or major hex side for 1 ship movement point, after which it would become finished. This is the only way units using ship movement may end its move in a hex other than a coastal or major river hex. Here we have sea and coastal hexes and hex sides. Sea hexes are entirely blue with no coastline symbol. Coastal hexes contain a soft, lighter blue color and some portion of the coastline symbol. All hex sides of a sea hex are sea hex sides. While some coastal hex sides may be sea, some coastal, and some land, all units may cross coastal hex sides, paying the cost of the other terrain in the hex when using normal movement, or 1 movement point when using ship movement. Except when using ship movement, only flying units may cross sea hex sides. Lakes may contain sea hex sides. In no case may a unit end its move in a sea hex. So this would be a sea hex side. This would be a coastal hex, and this here would be a coastal hex side. Ship movement. Ship movement is an action which allows a unit to move a second time during its activation, using a special ship movement rating. A unit may use ship movement, may cross sea hex sides, coastal hex sides, and major river hex sides. It may enter major river hexes, sea hexes, and coastal hexes. It pays a movement cost of 1 movement point per hex side crossed, and must end its movement in a coastal or major river hex, with the exception of crossing rivers. A unit which begins ship movement in a friendly port or entry hex has a ship movement rating of 6. Otherwise, it has a ship rating movement of 3. Don't forget, these are the entry hexes. And here's a little diagram to help remind you of that. So as an example, this guy in the port wants to move with ship movement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he ends his movement there. This one, which is not in a port, also wants to do ship movement. 1, 2, 3. Ship movement along major rivers. It may be used to enter and leave major river hexes. A unit must follow the course of the river when using ship movement to enter or leave a major river hex. There's no port here, so it would be 1, 2, 3. This one is in the port, so since this is a major river hex, 1, 2, and then the major river ends, so it would not be able to continue down the river. A unit may use ship movement to cross a river or major river hex side, ending its move in a hex which is neither sea, coastal, nor a major river hex. This is the only way that a unit using ship movement may enter such a hex, and its ship movement ends immediately, even if it has movement points remaining. So, in this little setup here, this Oathborn army is in this hex here, and it's not a port. It declares ship movement action, gaining 3 movement points. It could move first down here, passing through a welcoming port settlement. It could alternatively use its 3rd movement point to instead cross the major river hex side and end its movement here, ending its ship move even if it had movement points left. If it had started its move in a port, it would have gained 6 movement points and could have ended its move in other spots. If it was, we'll say he starts here, and he could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and end down here, or come out of here. I believe you get the idea. And either way, if you use your ship movement points and leave the hex, you end your move and you are no longer activated or ready. You are finished. So it'd be 1, 2, then we'll say he goes here. Even he started in a port up here, ends his movement because he left the river with ship movement. Legal and prohibited hexes and hex sides. Prohibited hexes may not be entered during movement. There are special cases where prohibited hexes may be passed through, but in no case may a unit end its activation in a prohibited hex. A legal hex is a hex that is not prohibited. A prohibited hex is one containing an enemy army, a hostile settlement, allied enemy entry hex, sea hex, or a lair. There are exceptions to these. For example, an exception to being able to move through an enemy army is a flying unit unless the enemy army has a flying or ranged unit. An example for a hostile settlement, flying units unless it's occupied by a unit with flying or ranged. And the example for an exception of the entry hex is any unit may pass through, but they cannot end their movement there. For a sea hex, a flying unit and any unit using ship movement may go through them, but it is prohibited to end your movement on them. And with a layer, there are no exceptions. When moving, the indicated unit types may pass through but not end their activation in those prohibited hexes. Prohibited hex sides. A prohibited hex side is a hex side that may not be crossed. C hex sides are prohibited from non-flying units not using ship movement. Hexes other than C, coastal and major river, are prohibited to using ship movement to move across them. So your ships can only go on water, can't cast flight on them and fly them over the land. Partial hexes are on an edge of the map and may only be occupied by a unit if half or more of its hex is visible. Otherwise, it is prohibited. So this is half a hex, so it could go there. This one is not a full half of a hex, so it is prohibited. When 2 or more units occupy a hex, they form a stack. In the basic game, only one army may occupy a hex at a time. This 1 army per hex stacking limit is enforced at the end of each army's movement. An army may pass through a hex occupied by a friendly or allied army, but may not end its move in such a hex. An army may not be built in a hex in excess of stacking limits. A unit may end its movement in a hex in excess of stacking limits, provided the inactive unit, or stack, is both friendly and ready. The active unit may not perform an action after its move, and that ready unit must activate next, leaving that hex, so that the stacking limits are no longer exceeded. This rule allows units to switch places while observing stacking limits. Now for combat. An active army may initiate combat against a hex adjacent to it by performing an attack action. Enemy armies and unoccupied hostile settlements may be attacked. Armies conduct combat using their combat rating, consisting of 2 types of dice. Light dice, represented by the white, are 6-sided dice, and heavy, represented by the black, are 8-sided dice. To resolve combat, each player rolls dice and compares the total number of successes rolled with those against their opponent. The player with the most successes wins the combat and inflicts the difference as hits. So these freeholders would have 2 light dice as their attack strength, while this mountain troll has 3 heavy dice. The army performing the attack action is the attacker, and the target is the defender. Calculating total combat rating. When attacking and defending, players roll all dice gained from the following sources. First, your army combat rating, any hex side terrain between attacking and defending figures, most of the time for defense only, so that would be a forest hex side. But, referencing the Fjordlanders, the Rangers get an extra light dice when attacking from a forest. And then you check terrain within the defender's hex for defense only. Only the defender's combat rating is affected by terrain. Terrain dice are ignored during strikes, unless you have an ability or card that overrules the rulebook. Winning combat. An attacker wins combat by rolling at least 1 more success than the defender. The defender wins by rolling at least 1 more success than the attacker. If the player rolls the same number of successes, the result is a tie. If neither player rolls any successes, the result is a draw. If there is a winner, hits are inflicted on the loser equal to the difference between the number of successes rolled by each player. For example, if an attacker rolls 3 successes versus a defender's 1 success, the attacker wins combat, inflicting 2 hits on the defender, 3 successes for the attacker minus 1 for the defender. For each hit scored, the player suffering the hit chooses one of the following options based on what the hex contains. If it is a full-strength army, it is flipped to its weakened side. If it is a weakened army, it is eliminated and the attacker may advance. If it is a fragile army, the fragile unit is eliminated and the attacker may advance. If it is a garrison and it is defeated, the attacker must advance. Eliminated armies and heroes are returned to the owning player's playmat, from which they may be rebuilt. Unoccupied hexes and advance. Any hex that does not contain an army is said to be unoccupied. When an attack inflicting 1 or more hits on the defender results in the defender's hex being unoccupied, the attacking army may choose to move into that hex. This is called an advance. When a hostile settlement is defeated in combat, the attacker must advance into the hex. An army may never advance into a prohibited hex. Remember to check terrain modifiers. Terrain may modify the defender's combat rating during combat. Consult the terrain effects chart for details. If terrain would impose multiple modifiers, all are applied. So we'll say here in this example, this mountain troll wants to attack Nal Narog. The Oathborn settlement of Nal Narog is in the wildlands and it is unoccupied. It is being attacked by this troll, which has a combat rating of 3 heavy dice. It's attacking from this southwest hex across a bridge over the boiling river. Unoccupied settlements automatically have a garrison rating of 1 light dice. Nal Narog gains a 2nd light dice for being a mountain wilderness settlement. It gains an additional 2 light dice because the attacking and defending hexes share major river hex side. The bridge and the road do not cancel the effect for the major river for combat, only for movement. Nal Narog will roll 4 light dice as its defense against the mountain troll's attack. There can be additional modifiers. Special kingdom rules may also modify combat ratings. For example, a Fjordland ranger has a modifier of +1 light dice when attacking into or defending in a forest hex. When defending in or attacking into a forest hex, the ranger would add 1 light dice to its printed combat rating of 2. And there are garrisons. Garrisons help defend settlements. If, after receiving 1 or more hits in combat, a settlement is unoccupied, meaning there is no army in the hex, the garrison has been defeated, and the attacker must advance. Garrisons disappear if a settlement is razed. Garrisons in unoccupied settlements has a garrison which provides 1 light dice on defense. A settlement occupied by an army would have no garrison. And a settlement with a city has a permanent garrison which provides 3 light dice on defense, whether it is occupied or not. Ambush. If either the attacker or defender in combat has stealth, it may declare an ambush. When an ambush is declared, instead of rolling dice simultaneously, the army with stealth strikes first, rolling dice equal to its combat rating. If the target survives, it strikes back using its combat rating. If the original defender is eliminated by the ambush, the original attacker must advance if the defending hex contained a hostile settlement. When resolving combat as an ambush, there are no winners, losers, ties, or draws. If both the attacker and defender have stealth, an ambush may not be declared and combat is resolved normally. There's a special type of attack that may come up called a strike. To perform a strike, the player initiating the strike rolls dice, the target would not. If the striking player rolls 1 or more successes, a single hit is inflicted on the target. Terrain effects are ignored during strikes. Strikes may not target a unit in fortified settlements. Critical hits generated by a strike may cause more than 1 hit on the target. Let's summarize a strike. Only the striking player rolls dice, terrain modifiers to combat ratings are ignored, fortified settlements may not be targeted, with an exception. If a defender with stealth declares an ambush, the attacker may strike back, ignoring the prohibition against striking fortified settlements. Inflicts 1 hit on the target regardless of the number of successes rolled. Critical hits may cause additional hits. In the advanced mode, there are strikes outside of combat. Critical hits. When resolving combat or a strike, a die roll result of 7+ is both a success and a critical hit. Each critical hit may score 1 additional success if confirmed. To confirm a critical hit, 1 light die is rolled. If a success, it is added to the total number scored. Critical hits are the only way a strike can inflict more than 1 hit. Critical hit rolls are unmodified by fortifications. A roll of 7+ will score a critical hit against a fortified hex, and a 5+ will confirm it. The basic game combat sequence. When a unit performs an attack action, combat is resolved using the following sequence. Step 1. Ambush declaration. Either side may declare an ambush if it has an army with stealth, in which case the remainder of combat is resolved as an ambush. Step 2. Resolve dice rolls. Players roll dice equal to their total combat rating. Confirm critical hits if any are scored. Then, Step 3, Combat Results. Determine the result of combat. If there is a loser, it receives hits. If the attacker wins, it may advance into the defender's hex if it is unoccupied. It must advance if it's a settlement. Ambush Resolution. If an ambush is declared in Combat Step 1, resolve the remainder of the combat using the ambush sequence. Step 2, Opening Strike. The army that initiated the ambush performs a strike on its opponent using its combat rating. If any successes were rolled, 1 hit is inflicted on the opponent. Confirmed critical hits may inflict additional hits. Step 3, Strike Back. If the target of an ambush survives an opponent's strike, it strikes back, using its combat rating. There is no winner or loser in an ambush. The attacker may advance into the defender's hex if it is unoccupied, must advance if it contains a settlement. Heroes in combat will be gone over in the advanced rules. Siege engines are a specialized army type designed to defeat enemy fortifications. Siege engines have a combat rating that may be used only to defend against attacks and to attack an unraised settlement. The red little tower symbol in the bottom left of the counter is your reminder of this. The effect of siege engines. 1 siege engine army adjacent to a fortification negates that fortification's -1 modifier. 2 siege engines adjacent to a magically fortified settlement negate its -2 modifier. 1 adjacent siege engine would only reduce that modifier to -1. A siege engine negates the fortification modifier when performing its own attack action. A siege engine does not negate fortification modifiers for enemy armies. Unlike other types of armies, siege engines may be disbanded voluntarily, allowing them to be built elsewhere on the map. During the income actions step only, the active kingdom may remove its siege engine from the map and return it to its playmat. Now we'll take a look at building and recovery. At any time during its activation phase, a kingdom may bring new armies into play, chosen from those available on its playmat, by paying their cost in gold. Each kingdom has a limited number of each unit type that can be built. If all armies of a particular type are in play, no further armies of that type may be built until one of them returns to the playmat. Once in play, a unit may not be returned to the playmat voluntarily, with the exception of siege engines. Building armies. Armies are built at full strength, paying the build cost on the front of the counter, which is up there. Armies may not be placed and built weakened. An army may be built in a friendly entry hex, in or adjacent to a friendly settlement. An army may not be built in a hex occupied by another army. Kingdom-specific rules may give additional instructions on where armies may be built. An army built in an entry hex or a settlement hex enters play ready. An army built in a hex adjacent to a settlement enters play finished. And gone over in further detail in the Kingdoms section will be feral armies and the Army of the Night. The Army of the Night may build feral armies in wilderness hexes adjacent to its covens. An army built adjacent to a coven enters play finished. See the Advanced Rules or Advanced Rule video about building heroes. Besieged settlements. If an army occupies a hex adjacent to a hostile settlement, that settlement is besieged. A besieged settlement may not be used to build or recover armies. Ignore this rule when setting up the game. An Army of the Night Coven is a besieged settlement may continue to build and recover feral armies in an adjacent wilderness hex. Besieged ports. A port settlement is only besieged if 2 or more enemy armies occupy hexes adjacent to it. They may be from different kingdoms. Prohibited terrain and siege. An army separated from a hostile settlement by a hex side it is prohibited from crossing is ignored when determining if the settlement is besieged. A non-flying army separated from a hostile settlement by an all-sea hex side would not cause the settlement to be besieged. If the army had flying, it would cause the settlement to be besieged, the all-sea hex side not being prohibited to it. Recovery. A weakened army may use the recovery action if it ends its move in a friendly entry hex or in a hex adjacent to an unbesieged welcoming settlement. To recover, the owning kingdom pays the army's recovery cost and flips it back to its full strength side. The army then becomes finished. An army with Regenerate may recover as a free action at any time outside of combat by paying its recovery cost and flipping it back to full strength. An army may regenerate anywhere on the map. And again, as covens are explained in the Kingdoms section of this video, a feral army may recover in a wilderness hex adjacent to a friendly coven. And now we will take a look at how the season ends. First, you would advance the season marker. The season marker is advanced one space on the season track. If the season marker occupies the space with the campaign ends marker, the game ends instead, and victory is determined as outlined in that campaign's instructions. If the marker occupies a winter space, advance it to the spring space of the following year. So we'll just say that that was where the end is. Oops. Once you advance the season, you'd move banners out of the turn complete spaces on the turn track. And then you would begin the next season. Repeat this sequence of play beginning with the first kingdom on the turn track. And now we will be taking a look at the kingdoms themselves. Each of the kingdoms in Burning Banners has special rules which makes playing them a unique experience. Information cards are provided which summarize the rules for each kingdom. The first kingdom we're going to take a look at is the Oathborn. One of their first specials is mining. Mines are scattered about the various maps in mountain hexes. These are ignored by units other than the Oathborn. Mines are not settlements and may be entered freely by any kingdom's unit. An Oathborn miner army in a mine hex may use its action to work the mine, gaining 1 gold. Here is an example of a mine. They have this dual hammers symbol. The Oathborn are also mountaineers. Oathborn armies, with the exception of the Oathborn siege engine and heroes, spend 1 movement point to enter mountain hexes instead of 2 movement points. Next, we'll take a look at the Shashka kingdoms, the Orcs and the Goblins. They have control markers. As indicated by the red -1 on their control markers, a Shashka kingdom must pay 1 gold for each of its control markers on the map during its income step. If it is not paid, the kingdom will collapse. During the income action step, a Shashka kingdom may lay waste to any number of settlements containing its control markers. To lay waste to a settlement, replace its control marker with a raised marker and loot the settlement. If a Shashka kingdom has never controlled any settlements, it is not subject to collapse. There are campaigns in which Shashka kingdoms start the game controlling no settlements. Once an Orc or Goblin control marker is placed on the map, including during setup, the kingdom will collapse if either of the following occurs. During its income step, the kingdom is unable to pay 1 gold for each of its control markers, it will collapse. And at the end of its activation phase, if the kingdom has no control markers on the map, it will collapse. Entry hexes. Shashka kingdoms have permanent printed entry hexes lying along the easternmost map edge for the Orcs and the northernmost map edge for the Goblins. And special to the Shashka kingdoms are Goblin Mountaineers. This is not available for the Orcs. Goblin armies, with the exception of the Goblin siege engine and heroes, spend 1 movement point to enter mountain hexes instead of 2 movement points. The Orc kingdom will not benefit from this rule. The Army of the Night. They have covens. Army of the Night control markers feature covens on the reverse side. Covens are placed in hostile settlements. They provide income to the Army of the Night while they remain on the map. They do not affect control of settlements they occupy and may coexist with enemy units and markers. During the income action step, the Army of the Night player may attempt to place 1 coven in any hostile settlement on the map that does not already contain a coven. Covens may occupy spaces, settlements containing enemy units, and control markers. A coven may not occupy a welcoming or raised settlements. The moment a settlement containing a coven becomes a raised or welcoming to the Army of the Night, the coven is removed. To place a coven, the Army of the Night player selects a settlement and rolls 1d6. If the result is a success, 5+, the coven is placed in the settlement. If the result is a failure, the coven is not placed. The roll to place a coven may be modified. +1 if the settlement is unoccupied, +1 if the settlement is unfortified, +1 if the settlement is a wilderness settlement or is adjacent to a wilderness hex. These modifiers are cumulative. An unoccupied, unfortified wilderness settlement would add +3 to the placement roll. Covens listed as part of the Army of the Knight's opening builds do not have to make successful die rolls. They may be placed in any hostile settlement. There are several effects of a coven and ways to remove a coven marker. First, the effects. Income. During the income step of the Army of the Knight turn, each coven on the map gains 1 additional gold for the kingdom. For example, if the Army of the Knight's income is 9 and it has 3 covens on the map, it collects 12 gold during the income step. Building and recovery. The Army of the Knight may build and recover feral armies and wilderness hexes adjacent to settlements containing covens. Those armies enter play finished. Control. A settlement's control is unaffected by the presence of a coven. Hidden agents. When an Army of the Night army attacks a settlement hex containing a coven, either by regular combat or ambush, it gains 1 light die. How to remove them? Covens are removed when a settlement becomes welcoming or is raised. Covens may be voluntarily removed by the Army of the Night at any point during its turn. Covens are removed the moment an enemy army ends its movement in the coven's hex, unless the Army of the Night player makes a successful hiding in shadow roll. A coven is removed when the settlement becomes welcoming, the settlement is raised, or the coven fails to hide in shadows when an enemy ends its movement in that settlement. How to hide in shadows? If an enemy army ends its move in a settlement containing a coven marker, the coven is removed. The Army of the Night player may attempt to prevent this by hiding in shadows. Roll 1d6. If the roll succeeds, the coven remains in place. If the roll fails, the coven is removed. So, on a 1 to 4, the coven is discovered and dispersed, you would remove the coven marker. On a roll of 5+, the coven escapes detection, the coven remains in play. After the Army of the Night makes its hiding in shadows roll, the enemy unit triggering the roll may perform its action normally. Once a coven successfully hides in shadows, it is protected for the remainder of the active kingdom's turn. They also have the Spire of the Moon. The Spire of the Moon is a magical fortification, so it gives a -2 modifier to the attacker. And covens have support. Covens give 1 gold per turn and allow feral armies and adjacent wilderness hexes to recover and build. The Eastern Empire. Imperial/Empire, the terms Eastern Empire, Empire, and Imperial all refer to the same thing, the Eastern Empire Kingdom. Revolt. The Empire is politically unstable, racked by rebellion and disloyalty among its conscripted armies. During the income action step, as a secondary effect of some of the Imperial blessings, Imperial subjects may rise in revolt, diminishing the Empire's ability to collect taxes. Imperial Revolt Check. During the Eastern Empire's income action step, the Imperial player rolls 1d6 and consults the Imperial Revolt table. 1. Season of Fire and Terror. As the endless war slaughters the poor and impoverishes the wealthy, the Empire threatens to disintegrate. The Empire suffers 4 revolts. Treasonous nobles form a faction. A clique of ambitious nobles takes up arms against the Emperor, outraged that their prerogatives are being trampled. The Empire suffers 3 revolts. Commander stages a coup. An Imperial general decides to go his own way. He and his underlings wrest control of their province from civil authorities. The Empire suffers 2 revolts. Peasant uprising on a 4 to 5. An outlying province goes up in flames. Nobles are robbed, granaries are looted, tax collectors assaulted. The Empire suffers 1 revolt. 6+. Imperium in Aeternum. Despite grumbling and corruption, the Eastern Empire proves itself, once again, a force for good. Long live the Emperor. The Empire suffers no revolts. Resolving revolts. Revolts are tracked in the revolt track. Whenever a revolt occurs, the marker in advance on the track is increasing its total by 1. If the revolt marker is in the 9 space when a revolt occurs, the marker is flipped to its +10 side and placed in the 0 space. That indicates that the number of revolts is 10 plus the value of the space marker it occupies. If the marker is already flipped, during each Imperial income step, the Empire must spend gold equal to the amount indicated on the revolt track. If the Empire fails to spend the required amount, each unspent gold will cause 1 additional revolt. The Empire may not choose to accept revolts in lieu of spending gold in this step. If it has gold, it must spend it. Suppression. Revolts may be suppressed during the Imperial turn. or during setup if the campaign rules permit. At a cost of 1 gold per suppression, each time a revolt is suppressed, move the revolt track to the next lower number on the track. When a revolt marker occupies the 0 space on the revolt track, it may not be reduced further. The revolt roll can be modified when playing campaigns in which only the Fields of Ash map is used. Add +2 the Imperial Revolt roll. Imperial Collapse. If the Empire suffers a revolt while the revolt marker is on its +10 side and it occupies the final space on the revolt track, the Empire collapses. The Fjordland. Ranger Woodcraft. Fjordland Ranger armies and heroes stacked with them spend 1 movement point to enter forest hexes instead of 2 movement points. Additionally, a Ranger army gains +1 light die while striking into, attacking, or defending in a forest hex. Fjordland Seafaring. Ship movement for Fjordland units is a free action. It may be declared by an active Fjordland unit before, during, or after movement. Once the unit has performed an action, ship movement may no longer be declared. A Fjordland unit or stack may perform ship movement once per activation. The Draken army does not benefit from Seafaring rule. It is both feral and huge. In addition, Fjordland units have ship movement rating that is 2 higher than normal, 8 movement points when departing a port, and 5 when departing other hexes. And finally, there are 2 other kingdoms, Mara Mitai and the Assassin's Guild. Mara Mitai and the Assassin's Guild are non-player kingdoms with loyal settlements on the Burning Banners map. These settlements are loyal neutrals and may be hostile, welcoming, or allied to player kingdoms, as outlined in the rules for each campaign. There are no playmats or armies for these nations, and I'm probably pronouncing that one wrong. Well, I was going to play this game before I did an advanced rules video, but I'll probably just upload the advanced rules video a little later. I was mistaken by BoardGameGeek.com saying this is a 1 to 6 player game. It's actually designed for 2 players. You can play by yourself by playing as best as you can as both sides. I already do that with some of those HeroScape videos I post. I don't feel like doing it with this game. This is a little bit of a deeper strategy game, and fantasy military games are few and far between. I want to actually play this with someone, but I want to upload the advanced rules video before I forget what I just did for the basic. So, there will be just 2 videos of this game on my page. I'm not sure if I'll ever get a gameplay video up. It would be nice, but we'll see. Otherwise, here in 2025, I'm going to start some different solitaire games. I'm going to do some more HeroScape stuff as well, and we'll see what happens after that.